Wait a minute, kid. How old are you?
17, sir.
Oh, good. He's 17.
Doctor, Mr. Chekhov is correct. I can confirm his telemetry. If Mr. Sulu is able to maneuver us into position, I can beam aboard Nero's ship, steal back the black hole device, and if possible, bring back Captain Pike.
I won't allow you to do that, Mr. Spock.
Romulans and Vulcans share a common ancestry. Our cultural similarities will make it easier for me to access the ship's computer to locate the device. Also, my mother was human, which makes Earth the only home I have left.
I'm coming with you.
I would cite regulation, but I know you will simply ignore it.
See? We are getting to know each other.
Welcome to part 2 of our Star Trek episode. Now, you know what happens before we go to real talk. We do some PP, our patron pitch. John, he decided to excuse himself. He didn't want to really sit around while we talk about our patron channel, which he is a part of. He figured it was a good time to stretch his legs while we tell you, patrons and non-patrons, what's going to be there. So patrons know what they can expect on the exclusive patron feed, and non-patrons find out what they're missing out on. Alex, we're starting a new month, December. We're closing the year, closing it strong, with 2 new QVRs, new quick video reviews requested / demanded by Sam Hurley from Movie Reviews and 20 Qs. Sam Hurley, who's become a father for the second time.
My God.
Yep, happened a couple months ago. I just didn't bring it up on the show because we've been recording so far in advance. But yeah, Sam's a father twice over now, and
hell yeah, congrats, man.
Congratulations. His life is officially not his own. Whenever I see him surface in social media, I can just imagine his 2 kids just pulling him down. He comes up for air, but he came up for air to tell us that he wants you, Alex, to watch The Raid and do a quick video review on that. You haven't seen The Raid, right?
No, but I remember when it came out, everyone was telling me I needed to watch it. Yeah,
I remember when it came out too, and it made a big splash. I know there's a sequel as well, but I've never seen it, so I'll wait and see what you say. For me, he requested / demanded the movie Leave No Trace, which I've also heard about. That's a Ben Foster drama. I think it's him and his kid traveling through the woods. No, it was kind of an indie darling, I think, when it came out and back in 2018. Never seen it, always meant to. So now it's going to happen, and patrons are going to see my reaction on video. So there is that on the QVR front. Also, patrons of all levels are going to have access to our bonus episode for the month of December. This time from Ryan, the same Ryan that's going to be joining us next episode for Nothing But Trouble. He is making us watch the movie Fateful Findings. Alex, I can only hope that this is one of those Ryan recommendations that is good and not one of the troll moves like when he made us watch Hancock.
Yeah, I'm hoping for the same.
Yeah, but whatever the case, it will be an interesting discussion, and that's just for you patrons. There's also the usual stuff that's available throughout the channel every month. Our Cutter Room Floor segments with the things that don't make it into the episodes, our pre-recording notes that we scribble before we come to the recordings.
We might have to squeeze in a Christmas movie next month too.
You know what? I was going to bring it up to you when we're not recording, but now that you brought it up here, yes, let's do that.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I'll let you pick because you're the expert when it comes to Christmas movies, and I'm just somebody who doesn't watch them unless I'm made to. And then, of course, we have Contrarians After Hours. That's the spin-off show where we talk about other things that we watched, that we read, that we listened to, that we played, that we thought about. Alex, what are you bringing to Contrarians After Hours this time?
Well, Julio, for After Hours this time, I'm going to be discussing a recent jaunt I had to the theater. Myself and our friend, Reed, went to the Paramount last week for a pretty fucking cool event. It was a performance by Claudio Simonetti's Goblin. Now, that may not sound familiar to you at all, but
I'm assuming he's a wrestler.
He's not a wrestler. Goblin was the group that did the score for a lot of Dario Argento's films. Specifically, they did the iconic score for Suspiria, the real Suspiria from 1977. And what this show was the group performing the score to Suspiria live to the movie. So they had the movie playing on the screen, and then the band was there and they played the score live. So that was awesome. So just kind of recounting that, and then like the concert that came after it and the crowd, and just, talking about the Paramount and whatnot. So recounting, I think that's the third time I've seen Suspiria in a movie theater. That movie's 45 years old. So, I mean, that 4K restoration came to Austin a few years ago. You got to go see it, man. But for those of you who haven't been to the Paramount, I'll give a little bit of backstory on it as well. So that is my topic du jour, Julio. What are you bringing to the table?
I'm gonna keep in theme with the stars and space and the final frontier. Alex, I watched the new Josh Gad show. Actually, it's not even new. It's on its second season, and I just now found out about it. It's called Avenue 5. It stars Hugh Laurie and Josh Gad and a bunch of other actors I'm going to tell you about. But it's here's the pitch, and I'll expand on the after hours. But the pitch is, what if Aniara was a comedy?
My God.
Yes. So I'll be telling you about that. And also, finally, my Babylon 5 journey has come to an end. I finished Babylon 5. I finished it, and I have thoughts. I'll tell you a little bit about it. It's only fair, since I talked about it in After Hours when I started. I talked about it when I got to the middle of the series, and now it's come to an end, and it was good. I'm glad I hopped on that wagon. So I'll tell you about that. It's a very different show from Star Trek, and most certainly a very different tone from Star Trek 2009, but that's okay. There's room in space for all types of storytelling. And I figure, since we're going to be making Ryan mad with this episode, might as well making him a little happy on the After Hours. But that's it. Babylon 5, Avenue 5, and Dario Argento 5. What's the name of the Goblin? Is that the name of the band? Yeah,
Goblin is the name of the Italian band that we'll be discussing.
I'm excited to hear about it. And so should you all. Any of that sounded interesting, check our Patreon page, patreon.com/Contrarian Prime. Look at the tiers, see what kind of access you would like. There's different levels, and join the Contrarian supplements.
$1, $3, $5, and $10 are respective tiers. Check it out. Drop 4 quarters in the digital tip jar for us, and take a look around, see what it is you like. You get access all the way back to the beginning, our very first patron episode on Blue is the Warmest Color. Everything up until now that I say confidently, you will not find any more comprehensive coverage of the 2011 and 2012 John Cena, Dwayne Johnson program and their movie careers before and after than what you will find on our Patreon page. For all of our existing patrons, as I like to say, I love you all so dearly, and we continue to take applications for new ones. So check it out. Patreon.com/Contrarian Prime.
Now, Alex, this isn't exactly patron related, but it's this is a good place to bring it up. Our next episode is episode 170, and usually what we do when we reach those multiples of 10 is give you a gray area episode. We pick a movie that's kind of in the middle of the tomato meter, and one of us defends it, the other one attacks it, and we have a jolly good time. And we're going to shake things up a little bit now that we're in year 9. We want to give ourselves and our listeners and our patrons as much flexibility as possible. And so we don't want to just tie ourselves down to a gray area episode. So now, whenever we reach a multiple of 10, it's going to be a wild card episode. And what that means is that we can do whatever we want. So it may be a gray area episode, or it may be another rotten movie or another fresh movie. We don't have to worry about what follows in the, according to our pattern. It may be a movie that normally would be, maybe it's not rotten enough or not fresh enough, but we want to do it, as if it was fresh or rotten. Yeah, we'll do that too. Maybe it's a movie that doesn't have a rating. We'll do that as well. So multiples of 10 is where we can just kind of go a little crazy with what we're doing. In this case, for 170, we're not going to go super crazy yet. What we're going to do is, instead of doing a gray area, we're going to do a another rotten movie, because that's kind of like what fit better in our schedule. We're going to have our friends Ryan and Bartek come in and do a rotten movie with us. And we'll tell you more about that once we get to the end of the episode. But from now on, we're going to spice it up a little more on those multiples of 10s. I'm assuming that you're okay with this, Alex.
Yes, I mean that sounds like a plan. It allows us a bit more leeway in terms of like what we can do, because even like we've only done not only, but when we got to those gray area episodes, we're like, well, what are we gonna do? There's too much out there, and then movies that we want to cover that would apply to that. So I'm looking forward to it.
All right, Alex. It's time. Let's log on the coordinates for John and beam him back up into the studio so we can do some real talk about Star Trek 2009.
What? Are you from the future?
Yeah, he is. I'm not.
Well, that's brilliant. Do they still have sandwiches there?
All right, Julio, we are back. And I am excited for this because Star Trek is not something, I typically dabble in. We did it on the podcast many, many moons ago where William Shatner explained that he needed his pain, and that was kind of a door opening for me. But you and our guest today have a bit more context and knowledge than I do. And also, it's just been so fun to go back to a point in time where Chris Pine wasn't a bona fide A-lister, nor was Chris Hemsworth. It's like going through this, thinking of who the big names were, and it definitely wasn't them. I mean, Simon Pegg probably had more of a profile than Chris Pine at this point in time. It's a fascinating movie to discuss, and I'm excited to do so. 94% on the old RT. Most people loved this. I texted you earlier today. It's like, why do people hate this? And you responded back with just a screenshot of the 94%. You're like, what are you talking about? And I responded to you. I was like, I talked to too many fucking nerds, man. Because like people I talk to about this don't seem to like it for whatever reason. But that's obviously not the case. Still, 6% of the critics that accrued that score don't like it. What are their beefs? What are their complaints? Not enough pretty people?
Too much Tyler Perry. That's their complaint. We're going to start with Kyle Smith on the rotten side of the quotes. KyleSmithOnline.com. He says, barely competent. J.J. Abrams has a TV soul. I've heard this complaint about Abrams before, and I wonder if either of you agree. Do you think J.J. Abrams is a TV director that can't quite make the jump to features? Like, or was that a problem at least at first? I know that everybody always says, not everybody, but the people that don't like Mission Impossible 3, they're like, oh, it just looks like a TV show. It doesn't look like a movie. Agree? Disagree?
It doesn't look like Mission Impossible 2. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Where are the doves?
I guess, is that 24 is the immediate thing I think of like that kind of looks like that. But no, it still looks like a movie. I mean, this is like riddled with the tropes of the time, what was in the fashion. It's got the Bourne cam the entire time and the lens flares and whatnot. It's a product of its time. And I don't know, I'm the wrong audience because I like Force Awakens, and I know people castigated him for that just because he basically just made a cover of A New Hope, and nothing wrong with that. I also hate Rise of Skywalker, so I don't know. I don't know how I feel about J.J. Abrams. No, I like Mission Impossible 3. I like this. It's funny. That's a review that hasn't aged very well because TV and film just blend together now. So someone, 20 years from now will read that review and be like, what the fuck does this mean?
What does having a TV soul mean? I don't even see it as like the way that the story is structured. But maybe that's what they're going for. I don't know. Next, Wesley Lovell from CinemaSide says, while entertaining as a space soap opera, the film dismantles much of what made Star Trek once great. Put a pin on that, because I think that will be a big talking point as far as like what made Star Trek once great, and if we can even determine that. But I wanted to put it here because obviously I kind of brought it up in Contrarians Corner. Next, Eileen Jones from The Exile said, did all the fight choreographers in Hollywood boycott this production or something? Do you think the fights are hard to follow in this movie?
They're way too close up to really follow what's going on, but they're all very concise and short, so I don't think it's that big of a deal.
John, were you lost?
No, I mean, I've seen movies where I'm totally lost in fight scenes and like thinking like, who, this is not an action director. But like Alex said, it's concise. They're fast. Like the longest fight scene is what on the mining rig.
Yeah.
With Sulu and Kirk, and that's fine. I'm not bothered by that.
He has a sword. Sulu pulls out a sword, which is
he pulls it, like a modular sword that like unfolds. Yeah, like why does Starfleet have that? But you know what? Cool.
It's because he majored in fencing. That's
yeah.
And we're gonna close with the one and only Roger Ebert, who didn't like J.J. Abrams' Star Trek. Roger Ebert from the Chicago Sun-Times says, the Gene Roddenberry years, when stories might play with questions of science, ideals, or philosophy, have been replaced by stories reduced to loud and colorful action. Roger Ebert is a traditionalist when it comes to Star Trek. He wanted Spock and Kirk to just have a 30-minute discussion about the meaning of life and then shoot Nero at the end.
Just push him into a black hole.
Yes. So, before we get your thoughts on Star Trek, John, or maybe as a gateway into them, why did you pick Star Trek? Why did you throw Star Trek our way?
Random. It was totally random.
There was no plan.
It honestly was. You had said to me, would you like to come on the show? And I think, with the criteria of the show, I went on Rotten Tomatoes and just looked at like higher scoring films. I don't even know how I found it. Like I just went on, or I maybe went on, maybe I looked up like maybe last 20 years and this one popped up as being really high, like what, 94%, right? In terms of like the fresh rating. And it's a film I've seen multiple times. And I just, you know what, sometimes when you go on someone's show and they ask you, you can overthink it forever. And I just said, you know what? And I think I said to you, have you done any Star Trek? And you said The Final Frontier, which funnily enough, we've done 2 on the pint. We did the motion picture and The Final Frontier, the only 2 Star Trek movies we've ever done.
Nice.
And I said, fuck it, let's do it. I think I was also kind of shocked at 94%. Like I wasn't expecting that. So I think it lended itself to good conversation because it has something to go up against, right? It's so you're comparing it to something, and very much like Ebert just said, like you're talking about the differences between what they did then and what they did now, and how that affects an audience's perception. And I think also, again, I think I was really surprised by 94%.
Yeah, that's a hard saying. When I saw that score, I was like, what? Because okay, help me out here. I might be conflating the other ones. Was there one of these in this trilogy that people really didn't like?
The second one.
Into Darkness.
Okay.
They just,
yeah.
It was too much that they messed with Wrath of Khan. I think that's...
it was J.J. Abrams trying to be clever by saying it wasn't Khan forever, and, and they made a big deal of that. And then when it kind of came out, it mirrored Wrath of Khan, but poorly, and, it's kind of tough when you take what's considered the best of the franchise, especially in movies, and try to ride on the heels of that, and you don't do a good job with it.
Yes, because I know enough to know. Like, I remember liking that, like, not being nuts about it, but I know enough to know, like, they flipped the scene where Kirk dies instead of Spock. Right. And
it's the reverse chainsaw.
And it was so fucking dumb when Benedict Cumberbatch's like, I am Khan.
Right, because when I saw that in the theaters, I didn't necessarily hate that movie. I didn't care for it. But, like, that scene means nothing to Kirk and Spock of this film series, right? In the original, Khan is a villain from the TV show. And in real time, essentially, like 20 years later, he comes back to take his vengeance on Kirk. And in this one, they have the scene where he's in like the little like holding cell, and he said, I am Khan, Nooney, and Sid, or whatever it is. And they're like, who the fuck are you? What does this mean? And that takes everything away. And what it does is it actually breaks the fourth wall and just becomes an Easter egg or a chainsaw moment. And that sucks. I don't want that chainsaw moment. I don't want you to make the character this character just so I go, I want you to make the character that character because it means something to the characters in the film. And it was a swing and a miss.
Look, I don't know you.
I am Spock.
Bullshit.
Well, not to derail us into an Into Darkness conversation, but I liked what they were going for, and I like this cast, and I think that's kind of like bringing it back here, like that starts here. I think that this movie, they nailed the casting. We can talk about whether they nailed the spirit of Star Trek, but I think that if the mission was to make a very popular movie that was going to be a blockbuster and it was going to launch a franchise and so on, that it was going to even capture new eyes for people that were not familiar with Star Trek as a franchise or were not interested, I think that they got it right. They got the right Kirk, the right Spock, the right Uhura. Everybody was really, really on point. And from then on, yes, if you want to follow it up with Into Darkness, I'll follow. I'll go along. And they made a third one. So that means that, whatever happened with Into Darkness financially, even critically, I mean, they still felt like they had legs.
So there is supposed to be a fourth one coming out next year.
Allegedly. But
I think
Okay.
I think that got canceled.
Okay.
That was the one that was going to be Hemsworth as his father, and it was going to be like a time travel-y type thing, and they kept on bouncing directors, and the last thing I heard was whoever was signed on to direct last. It was a female director. I don't remember who it was. She dropped out too. So I think it's kind of in purgatory at this point.
That's a shame.
So yeah, I've seen all three of these, and this was my first time seeing one of them more than once. I'd seen them all one time in the theater initially. And I might be so inclined to go back and revisit the other two now. I think obviously I'm coming from a place different than y'all with my lack of Star Trek knowledge. Does this get too cutesy for like Star Trek or?
Yeah.
I guess my question is, my question would be in line with like, does it commit enough to what it's going for that it pulls off what it's going for? Or does it fuck with the source material so much that it seems kind of jumbled if you're someone who's knowledgeable of the source material?
I think it pulls off what it's going for, because what it's going for is kind of like, let's do Michael Bay's Star Trek. Like, let's keep the characters the same. Let's hit all the greatest hits and keep all the chainsaw moments in there, but let's make it bright. Let's make it real shiny. Let's make the Enterprise bridge look like the Apple Store. Let's update it for 2009. Be a little less cerebral, and I'm stretching the word cerebral, but make it more of an action-y type thing, and see where it goes. And I think probably a lot of the hardcore Trekkers, as they like to be called, probably were bothered by that, but it made a lot of money, and I think it probably brought a bunch of people into, at the very least, maybe it was their gateway to Star Trek fandom. But yeah, I don't think, to me, as a Trek fan, I'm not offended by it in terms of, I don't feel like, they came in and they did this thing. I think much like the Next Generation movies were diminishing returns, they kind of went out with a whimper. And very much like Jason Bourne kind of forced the people at Bond to figure out what to do, that was the whole Craig thing. The Daniel Craig Bond movies were a response to Jason Bourne. Like, we can't do this, like, invisible car bullshit anymore. Like, we got to figure out, if Bond can kill someone with a magazine. And you know what? It seemed to work for that. It updated it for a different audience. And I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that this movie did a good job. But again, you have to go into it with, like, this is the Michael Bay Star Trek mindset. This isn't going to be an overly smart movie. This is going to be a fun ride that, that we get the greatest hits of Star Trek fandom in there.
I wish there wasn't such a negative connotation with the name Michael Bay, because you're right. But also, when you when you hear this is the Michael Bay Star Trek, you instantly think of the worst, like the lowest common denominator. And I think this movie's smarter than that.
No, I agree, but I'm just using it as like the actiony, big, shiny, brand new thing that's there, you know?
He didn't say Pain and Gain Michael Bay. He just said Michael Bay. So we...
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, well, but just to be clear, so do you have a preference, or do you is it all Trek, or do you have a preference as far as like, oh, I like the original crew better, or I like Next Generation better, or I like Chris Pine better?
Original, like original, the 66 TV show, and the, you know, even, you know, the whole thing with the Trek movies, the odd ones aren't good. I enjoy the first 6 films, all in their own way. Even Final Frontier, which isn't a great movie, it probably has the best bonding of the 3, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. The campfire scenes and everything. So yeah, I do love that stuff, and it was nice to see, you know, these actors do their interpretations, and also the fact I do like the fact that in this movie that they make it a plot point that it's a diverging timeline. So it's not like just like a weird reboot or this is our new, these are the same characters, just if the Narada came through and fucked everything up, this is what would have happened. I like the idea of that. I like seeing, you know, these characters in different versions of them.
Yeah, I like it too. I think, like I said in Contrarians Corner, my knowledge of Star Trek has increased since the first time I watched this movie. But even then, like the first time I watched it, you know, I was familiar with Next Generation and some of the original. I'd seen all the movies except the first one, I think, of the original crew, and I was just excited. I guess I hadn't been as invested in the Star Trek franchise to even feel the change of, oh, this is the action-minded Star Trek versus the, you know, the intellectual Star Trek from before, until much later. You know, when once people pointed it out and I started rewatching stuff, I'm like, you're right. These, you know, original Trek is just about big ideas and not so much about the shooting. But I remember I went to see this, I want to say it was the midnight show, you know, before the opening, like on a Thursday night or something. I went with my 2 friends that we eventually moved together to Austin with. So I was still living in College Station, and we went there. And my friend Drew, he had never watched a single Star Trek movie, show, anything. He was a Star Wars person. And the first 10 minutes happened, and, you know, the opening title screen comes up, and he turned to me and he was like, those 10 minutes, that opening was better than anything Star Wars has done in, you know, 10 years.
Right.
And I was like, oh, wow, like they hooked him. And then from then on, you know, we came out of that movie, and he went and he bought every season of every TV show. He bought every movie. He was just obsessed. And I was telling John before we started recording, I was telling him, like, we lived together for a year, you know, when we first moved here to Austin, and he would just have them playing. You know, it would be playing in his room or playing in the living room. It was just this thing that just became like the background in our apartment. It was just like Star Trek playing. It would be original series, or it would be Next Generation, or it would be one of the movies or whatever. And he really liked it. And this movie did that, you know. And I don't think that he's an isolated case. I think that it's just what you said. I think that a lot of people were introduced to these characters with the J.J. Abrams movie, and then they had this wealth of material available to them because, you know, they started doing the remasters of the old, you know, shows and all this stuff. So it is, I think that when people get mad about this movie, like, I understand, okay, it's not your Trek, right? But when people get mad about this, I think that they are choosing to ignore that it's not just this iteration of Trek or the other one. It's like, they even in this movie, they go out of their way to tell you it all exists, it all happened, right? And even if they didn't, you still have, as a member of the audience, you have all these choices. You can watch this, and then it's perfectly fine to go and watch something else that's from a different, you know, timeline or whatever. And you can enjoy both. You can enjoy intellectual Trek, and you can enjoy action Trek.
It would be very different if this movie was made at the same time that like all the original actors were still alive and still available, that might be like, well, you know, why are you making these when these guys at this point in 2009, half of those people are either dead or in their late 80s. It's just you age out, you know. The Las Vegas Raiders football team of this year are none of them are the same people from 15 years ago. You just got to kind of move along sometimes, you know.
As you have yet to select a first officer, respectfully, I would like to submit my candidacy. Should you desire, I can provide character references.
It would be my honor, Commander.
Now, Alex, I don't know if this makes a difference, but you have to have an opinion on this, John. And that is the other argument is just forget about the action or whatever, but more like the philosophy of Star Trek. Star Trek is well known as this idea that it's supposed to be about community and fighting for a better future, and it's not so much about the armed conflicts or whatever. And then, so do you feel that this movie betrays that a little bit when it just becomes about like, let's kill Nero at the end? Because even Wrath of Khan, I think, yes, Khan dies at the end of Wrath of Khan, but it's not as, I guess, a bloodthirsty climax as you see it here.
I guess maybe if you want to look at it, Nero was just so dangerous, that ship was so dangerous that they kind of had to let him go. I think it's played a little bit strangely for laughs when they're like, offering him help, and then when he says no, they're like, fuck it, go. Like, it does seem like they were really into letting him die. So yeah, I do get that, but I think that, again, we're in a different iteration of this franchise, and he was a dangerous character that could cause, like, he destroyed a planet. So I guess maybe there's levels. Maybe like, okay, you knocked over a liquor store, you set a fire somewhere, we're going to save you. You imploded a planet. Okay, maybe this is where we let you die.
Yeah. I don't have a problem with it, but that is the one point where, I don't know. I think that anybody getting too worked up about it is probably overthinking it a little bit, but I don't know, have Spider-Man kill somebody in cold blood and I might get that worked up,
Right.
But I guess, yeah, it's just weird that there doesn't seem to be a moment of reflection about, man, I wish that we had all worked it out. Because, the guy lost his planet. So it's not like he completely came out of nowhere with this vendetta. It's he's acting irrationally, but it is, I don't know. Nobody mourns really Romulus. It's like Alex, I think, joked that, Spock doesn't seem to be that bothered by what happened. So I think that if somebody like a hardcore Star Trek fan tells me, well, this is why I don't like the J.J. Abrams movies, because they're kind of flippant in a way that is kind of offensive if you're a true believer of the core principles of Star Trek or whatever, I'll be like, all right. That is, I think that's a fair point.
Yeah, I see it, yeah.
But still, I as somebody who's not that invested, I think it's a great action movie. Now, Alex, do you have any opinions do you care about that, or to you it's just like, no, fuck it, Nero deserved to die and just bring on the next adventure?
I don't say fuck it, because obviously, as you know, there's like franchises and source material that gets fucked with that does bother me very much. So I can understand how someone would be that. We were on the break talking about X-Men movies. That's one that I've been infuriated by, with some of the liberties taken and approaches taken with the storytelling there. So yeah, I won't say fuck it, because I do respect people's, I don't know what to say, right, but I understand someone's, getting upset when something's tinkered with, a formula's tinkered with that worked for them previously. I've watched, Star Trek from every iteration that it's come in, and, to varying extents. It's one of those things, it's just, there's so much. That's like with Doctor Who, how I've acquiesced. I'm never going to watch Doctor Who because there's just, at this point in my life, it would take too much time. And Star Trek's kind of something similar in the sense of, if I wanted to, I could deep dive into it. That's the thing. I call myself a Star Wars fan, but I just watched the 9 movies. And so, like, to big-time Star Wars fans, they would find that insulting. They're like, you're not a fan? You don't watch the Clone Wars? Or, this shit. So with Star Trek, I'm familiar with where it's coming from, but also just for me personally, I really enjoy this at this point in the game too. I watch this movie almost like a time capsule because it comes from a different era. Like, it's only 13 years old, so I don't mean to make it sound like that's a long period of time, but the entire approach to making movies has changed since this came out. And watching it still is made from that Michael Bay position of let's make a big, loud, dumb movie that people are going to pay to see. And there's really no characters are broken and they have these motivations to do, like, there's these things that motivate them, but it's not. You can listen to any other episode where I gripe about the modern state of filmmaking. So watching this where it's just very by the books and simple, and every character does exactly what you think they will do in every turn of the film. Now, I'm not saying that's how these characters should be written based on their source material, but it's just, for what it is, it's a fun and easy watch, and I think that's the important thing to keep in mind. If you want to dive deeper into this, and the points John was making from the perspective of it's not a very heady movie, it's just a big, dumb, loud action movie that launched some careers, to truthfully speak. It's very fascinating to think about a time where Chris Pine, like I said, wasn't like a big star. And that was kind of the thing. This movie was at the time comprised of like nobodies. And, think of a studio that would spend, $200 million now making a movie like this with a cast of like, yeah, there's a couple, hey, that guy's in it, but it's largely just a bunch of randos that went on to, varying levels of success. But I think for those reasons, I think the parts that comprise it make it more enjoyable to me than just approaching it as a Star Trek movie, if that makes any sense at all.
Yep. I was doing like the roll call, and it's like, yeah, you have Gamora, you have Judge Dredd, you have Steve. What's his name in Wonder Woman? Is it Steve Carter?
Steve Trevor.
Steve Trevor.
Is that Chris Pine?
Yeah.
You can just call him one of the Tremor brothers. That works too.
Yeah, but that's not his big like pop culture imprint now. Zachary.
Oh, he's
Quinto.
Captain Kirk now.
Well, yeah, I guess he's mostly Kirk. But Zachary Quinto, I think that's the one that I know he's been in like things.
Heroes. You're right. He was. Isn't he like an American Horror Story guy? I don't watch that, but I think he's involved in a lot of those episodes, a lot of those seasons.
Yeah.
I dated a girl who was really into that show, and yeah, he's like a staple of that.
Yeah.
At least back when we were together. Eric Bana also, wasn't kidding. This was kind of the end of the Bonds experiment. Yeah. I've never seen his Hulk, but I think in this he's having a good time and he's fun.
Hello.
I'm Captain Christopher Pike. To whom am I speaking?
Hi, Christopher. I'm Nero.
$150 million was the budget. I said 200. $150 million was the budget. Box office return of $385 million. Something interesting I read about was Paramount was kind of nervous about how much was sunk into it because historically Star Trek has never pushed any business overseas. It's never been something that foreign audiences have taken to. But 31% of the gross for this came from overseas ticket sales. So they were pleasantly surprised by how this went. I never knew that. I just assumed it was like a global sensation.
Well, it's one of those things that it has to be because it's so much more action oriented. I mean, that's what I've always heard, right? That the dialogue heavy movies don't do well overseas whenever you have to translate because that's the problem, like but you don't need translation for the big action scenes, so it makes sense that a big action driven Star Trek would do better than the previous Star Treks where there's a lot of discussions about pain and all that stuff. I remember the other big thing that people say about J.J. Abrams in this Star Trek and probably the next one too. And it was something that I was planning to bring it up in Contrarians Corner. They completely forgot because got caught up on the story. But I was like, this was J.J. Abrams' step one in his 10-year plan to ruin Star Wars. Because it was, step one, make a Star Trek movie that's not a Star Trek movie, but it's really a Star Wars movie. And then that will get me the job to relaunch Star Wars. And then I can kill Star Wars by making Rise of Skywalker.
I do not blame him for Rise of Skywalker.
I don't, but it was gonna be funny when I said it in Contrarians Corner.
I'm sorry.
No, in real life. Okay, so this is. Have you heard that, John? Where people say like, "Oh, this is the movie that made turned Star Trek into Star Wars."
No, but I mean, I do see how somebody over in Star Wars world saw this movie and said, "Oh, this guy's got an eye." And he can deliver on the action, and yeah, let's bring him in. Yeah, but no, I don't think this is a Star Wars movie. It's not a Star Trek movie necessarily.
That's an interesting take. I think we live certainly in this social media age where people are so anxious to sound smart that they just try to force they just love comparing things to other things, even if it doesn't really make sense. So while I could kind of see the trail of thought to that, saying that like, oh, this turned Star Trek into Star Wars, you're trying to get the tweet perfect is what you're trying to do. And that's like a take that I need a good headline for this, that type of thing.
I think I can see how visually it maybe moved it a little closer to Star Wars, but it's still like fundamentally, to me, it's always Star Trek is about science and Star Wars is about fantasy. And that I don't think that they ever cross that line. I mean, even if it's action oriented, it's still science fiction.
Before this, when was the last Star Trek theatrical release? Was that Nemesis?
Nemesis, yeah. And that was like 2002.
Okay.
So like 7 or 8 years prior.
That's the whimper that John was referring to.
A total whimper, yeah. Nobody remembers that was Tom Holland as the bad, or Tom Hardy as the bad guy in that one.
Mm-hmm.
Skinny Tom Hardy.
So yeah, at that point, I mean, we rebooted Spider-Man like within 2 years. Like people, sometimes you need to give something a new coat of paint, and that's enough time passed to do so. Yeah, it's kind of weird to me that there hasn't been one since Beyond, just given the state of everything right now.
Well, I think I know this is not the reason, but I always felt like Anthony Yelchin dying was a big, like when that happened, I was like, okay, we're not getting any more. Because I just couldn't imagine them moving forward. I guess they could. I mean, Hollywood is pretty callous.
Dude, I was about to say, you give them way more credit than I would.
Well, it was the combination of like, okay, we haven't had it in a while. I know Abrams was no longer involved, and then is it Orsi and Kurtzman? I mean, I think that they were originally the next people that were going to take over the franchise, and then they left, and then Anton Yelchin died, and I was like, all right, well, do you need any more signs? I mean, I think it's like that's it.
And then in the meantime, too, what was missing during the time that these three, Star Trek Into Darkness and Beyond came out, was now there is a large TV presence of Star Trek again with Discovery, right. Strange New Worlds. There's a couple of Lower Decks. I think there's a couple of cartoon shows. So like you got 4 or 5 properties that are out there now. And, as far as I know, I watched the first 2 seasons of Discovery, and I know people hate it. Or a lot of people seem to hate it. I enjoyed the hell out of it.
Me too.
I think a lot of people are kind of digging what they're doing on the small screen, which is where Star Trek came from. So there's maybe not as much of a clamoring. And also, let's not forget, like, if you remember, when Beyond came out, that came out in the summer of, like, 16, which was the 50th anniversary of Star Trek, and they blew it. There was no fanfare. That movie came out like a fart in the middle of the night that you don't know you ever did, that you never smelled. It evaporated into the world, and that was it. And so yeah, it just seems like they kind of gave up on this line.
Sir, you didn't call my name. Kirk, James T.
Kirk, you're on academic suspension. That means you're grounded until the Academy Board rules.
Getting back to this, the story is simple, easy to follow, even hilariously so, with like Spock giving literally like 2 movies worth of exposition in 2 minutes, like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then I dropped this red matter, and blah, 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 blah. But Leonard Nimoy is great in this, in the sense of like, I believe he's Spock still, and not just like a winking, nodding cameo, which I appreciate, because it's all too often you come across shit like that where it's just kind of like, ah, here I am. He obviously has a lot of practice with being Spock, but I buy him in this movie as like, okay, he's actually here to serve a purpose.
That's one of my favorite moments in the movie is when he meets Kirk, Chris Pine.
Yeah.
And the way that he talks to him as if he's really, the young version of his friend. And of course, Pine is really funny reacting to the whole thing. But I was actually, again, I haven't seen this movie in so many years. So I was surprised at the fact that even though it's a fun scene and, you're having, it's a chainsaw moment and everything, but it was still kind of emotional. I really like that. Spock, because of the way he is, his personality, he's very matter of fact and very direct when he's talking. And so he's just speaking of their friendship in such a direct way, just in a very plain statements. And he's just saying, yeah, we were best friends. This needs to happen. And that was, I thought it was really sweet. That's the kind of shit that I live for. Like when you're playing with timelines and time travel or stuff, like that's the kind of interactions I want to see. I know it would be just too much to have Spock, do a tour of the entire cast and just meeting their younger versions. I honestly, I felt that they were even pushing it a little bit with him, like interacting with Scotty. But him interacting with Kirk was just perfect for me. It was just such a good snapshot of what I wanted from that plot and that relationship. So that was a big win. I will say my one thing, so I know we're coming to ratings, but just so I can explain why this is like a perfect movie for me. Why does it get 5 stars? I can get through a lot of the plot convolution in this movie, but asking me to just sit there and watch the 3 characters be in the same planet by coincidence is too much. Like I can buy Kirk being exiled to the same planet that Spock was in, because they kind of explain it, right? It had to be, I guess that planet, is where you could get the best view of Vulcan falling apart. And so the Enterprise was close, so it makes sense that they would send Kirk there, and that's where Spock was there. But that Scotty, who's the engineer that has developed or will develop the technology that they need to get Kirk back into the Enterprise, that he also happens to be in that planet, that's just too much.
Well, and also why was he important? Because Spock taught him how to do it using his own formula. Right. So Spock could have done it using that formula. It was just, you're right, it was just a way to get Scotty in the story, period.
That would create a time paradox in and of itself, him showing young Scotty his own formula that he's going to invent years in the future.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, the way that Spock has messed the timeline in this movie is just, he doesn't care. And I actually like that detail when he's like, basically, yeah, I learned it from you. Kirk showed me that. Sometimes you don't have to play by the rules. You just go, fuck it, I'm just going to mess the timeline. But I remember thinking that, and I remember thinking, why, if Spock knows that there's a Starfleet outpost here, why was he hiding in that cave? Why didn't he just go to the outpost to begin with? And it's like, oh, because he had to be there when Kirk shows up. But it's, that doesn't make any sense.
He got in a fight with the other cadets there and was like, fine.
They kicked him out.
I'm going to go live in a cave. Carl Urban's awesome. Anton Yelkin's great. Simon Pegg's great. Zoe Saldana she doesn't get too much to do, but she's great. I just, before we wrap up here, wanted to get y'all's thoughts on, obviously Spock and Kirk are the really iconic characters in this. So I wanted to get y'all's take. John, any takes on Zachary Quinto or Chris Pine? You like what they're doing here, or was it, again, I keep using the word cutesy, was it a bit too modernized in terms of approach?
No, I liked it. I think Quinto does more of a, I'm not going to say a Leonard Nimoy impression, but he plays the character of Spock more straightforward and Spock-like than anything we've ever seen Kirk acting like that. Again, like we said in the Contrarians Corner, bar fighting, semi kind of overly aggressive sexually. We know that Kirk is a ladies' man, but we see him kind of in his, I'd say youth, but you're right, he's 30 in his in his I guess Arrested Development phase. And I do like the fact that he really shouldn't. He's not the hero of this movie. Like, he's brash. He causes Spock all this emotional damage and then smirks about it as he like climbs into his chair. I like that. I like that we see that. And in this movie alone, I like that. I like it more because as the movies go along and they've been together longer, we do see him mature to a point. And I like the fact that in Into Darkness, in the first half, he's still kind of an asshole, even though he's a captain. He's still brash. He's still doing kind of like dangerous and dumb things. But no, I like them both. Like I said, I think Pine hits it more from a different angle, and I think Quinto does an admirable kind of imitation job, but he's good.
Yeah, I think at least in my experience, because I'm not as I haven't seen much of the original TV show. I've seen the movies, but I felt that they gave Quinto more material as far as Spock goes. Of like, okay, we're gonna show Spock in a light that we haven't before. Which, like, you're right, with Kirk, it's just things that we could have extrapolated, right? Like, if you see the James Kirk that William Shatner was playing, and you imagine him when he was younger, you're like, all right, I can buy that he was getting into brawls in Iowa and whatever.
Right.
And, but when you look at Leonard Nimoy's Spock, it's a lot harder, at least it was for me, to figure, like, what's young Spock like? What is he like? And what Quinto does is like, yeah, he has the mannerisms, but they also put him in a position where, he has a girlfriend, which is like, never would have thought of, when I think of Spock, I don't think of romantic relationships to begin with. And just the fact that he has those insecurities because he's a young guy and, he's put in a position of authority and all this stuff. So I watch this movie. I find them really entertaining. I like them both and everything. But it's like I said in Contrarians Corner, I'm always Team Spock watching this, and I know that part of it is Quinto's performance because he manages to get me on his side, and of course the way the script is written, I think that also I sympathize more with his side of it. Do you have a favorite, Alex? Are you Team Spock or Team Kirk watching this?
I'm not team. We did enough of that shit with Twilight, man. I'm not taking teams anymore. But I mean, it's no secret. I enjoy Chris Pine as an actor. Zachary Quinto, I wish I had seen him I wish I have seen him in more. I really enjoy what he does here and through the rest of the movies as well. But yeah, Chris Pine's great, and he's. I was so giddy when he got cast in the Wet Hot American Summer series because, like, I've always thought he's just really funny. Like he has like he can do physical comedy and not to the point of shtick. Like we talked about the scene where he's watching Uhura and Spock like kiss when he notices it, and just his reactions to it are so funny. And I think some of what he does in this, and even if it is just like really cocky prick stuff, he's entertaining. So yeah, I enjoy it. I mean, you're never going to be Leonard Nimoy or Shatner. You're certainly not going to be. There's never going to be another William Shatner. So trying to give it your own spin is definitely the way to go.
I sure hope you know what you're doing, Captain.
So do I.
It's not perfect. It's still like Hollywood bullshit in a lot of ways, and it is. I kept using the phrase "genuine blockbuster," and I stress that to mean it's not. You're not going to be thinking about this 2 days from now. You're not going to be like, oh, that's what that means. It's just a very fun waste of time. Sounds negative because I don't want it to. It's just, hey, here's something to look at and have a good time with. So I guess that's as good of any as a way to move into reviews. I think I'm content with like a B+. It's a lot of fun for what it is, and it was surprising to me to think about like what this kind of set into motion with certain careers, and also the fact that it was a movie that largely had a cast of not nobodies, but certainly not A-listers that we typically strive for these days when putting together something like this. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. We'll do a contrarian sandwich here, John. Letter grade, 5-star rating scale. If you want to give it sandwiches, whatever you want to give. What are your final thoughts here on Star Trek 2009?
Yeah, I enjoy this movie. I told Julio off air that I do my letterbox, and I just watched this again last year. It's just again take it aside from from what the original series is and everything, and what the original movies are, and what they decided to do works. It's the big shiny action version of Star Trek. You're right. You're not going to go, oh my God, that was the hidden meaning behind all that. You're not. But while you're watching it, you're going to go, that was cool. Like the opening scene with George Kirk and all that. It's fantastic. It's a, a lot of big blockbuster movies I judge heavily on, like, what was the opening scene like? What was the closing scene like? Because, that's what you're looking for, like the really good bread to put the rest of the meat in between, sandwich wise, as you said. And I think that this one starts fantastically. It draws you in. It answers a lot of the questions right off the bat in terms of, this is where Kirk came from. Oh, look, we're seeing his father really for the first time ever. So we do on our show, we do letter or star ratings numbers, and we do 5. I go 4. I'm going to go 4 for this. I really enjoy this movie. Like you said, Alex, it's brisk. Every bit of this movie, the opening, good 10 minutes, and then you move on. And then you meet Kirk as a kid, 5 minutes, and you move on. You meet Spock as a kid, 5 minutes, you move on. You meet Kirk as a young man, and then you move on. You get to the academy, you move on. They don't waste time. They get right to it, and it's enjoyable. So I'm going to go 4 stars.
Yeah, I agree. With everything you guys have said. It's I liked it. I don't want to say I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it, because I knew that I enjoyed it. I mean, I've seen this movie more than once, and as I said, for a while it was kind of like a fixture at my apartment. I guess if I was surprised by anything, it was by how well it held up, because it's been a few years since I watched it, and it still feels shiny and new and just full of energy. And I really appreciated that. I think that whatever flaws I perceive, whatever things that make me maybe scratch my head, like, I don't have time to really dwell on them, because the story keeps moving forward and there's something funny or something exciting happening right around the corner. And so this is probably, if I had time while watching the movie to stop and think about it, like the rating would go down. But the movie's designed to like keep me going, and the pleasure, I think, builds up as you keep going, because it just pays itself off. It's like you introduce Kirk and Spock as these guys are butting heads, and then by the end of the movie they're kind of buddies, and there's something really rewarding in seeing that evolution, far more so than whatever happens to Nero, or whether Tyler Perry gives Kirk a medal or whatever. It's just like those relationships really work for me. So I'm gonna go with 4.5 stars.
All right, well, John, thank you so much for joining us and picking this out. This was a fun episode. Where can listeners find you and your show?
All right. So The Pint, a pop culture podcast, any pod catcher, like, let's just be honest, just go to Apple or Google or iHeartRadio or Spotify, and you can find us there. If you want to catch us on the social media platforms, we're on Twitter and Instagram at The Pint Podcast. Facebook is just The Pint, a pop culture podcast. And if you get into listening to the show, or if you already listened to the show and you don't know, we have a Patreon /The Pint. Try to get out new episodes a couple times a month, and do other cool things on there as well. So yeah, just check us out. And thank you guys for having me on. I love your show, and it's been a lot of fun doing this. And like I said, I picked this movie kind of randomly, but also kind of because I like it and I want to talk about something I liked.
You put as much thought into this pick as Orsi and Kurtzman put into the script of Star Trek 2009, and it turned out fine.
Yeah, so everything's good.
No, I'm really happy that we made this happen. It won't be the last time you'll be here, John. Maybe next time we'll do a Rotten movie. We'll find something that you don't like.
I'm down for that.
I know you have like piles and piles of terrible movies that you like to inflict on people. So
yeah, absolutely.
We'll prepare for that. But that's it for Star Trek. Alex, you should ask me what we're doing next.
Julio, what are we doing next?
Speaking of collaborations and how many of them we've had in this second half of the year, we have another collaboration. We have 2 returning guests to the show. Ryan and Bartek are coming back to do a movie that Bartek wrote a haiku about, and that is Dan Aykroyd's Nothing But Trouble.
Oh,
Alex?
Jesus.
Alex, are you familiar with Nothing But Trouble? Because it sounds like John is.
No, that's just looking into it and seeing the cast involved was quite the experience. So I'm not really sure what I'm getting into here.
Well, it's a rotten movie, so it'll be the opposite of Star Trek, according to Rotten Tomatoes. We'll see. But that's in our future. John, what is The Pine doing? This is dropping in December, so do you have any idea?
Yeah, so I'll go with at least one. The first or second week of December, we're going to be talking about Heat, Michael Mann's 1995 instructional on how to have a firefight in the streets of LA. This is actually a movie that we've been talking about doing forever, and one of our buddies, who I'm in Connecticut, who lives in Vermont, wants to do it with us, but he only comes down a couple times a year, so he's coming down for Thanksgiving, and we're doing it at the weekend of Thanksgiving, and he's like, I'll be down. He's like, I'm coming over, so we're doing it. If he doesn't make it, fuck it, I'm just going to do it anyway, because literally it's been like 2 years we've talked about this, and at this point, the episode can't be like, it's going to just come out. It's got to come out of me. I've got to talk about Heat.
I like Heat, so I look forward to that episode. But that's going to be it. Alex, get us out of here.
All right, so to take us out of here, we're going to start off by giving thanks to the Festive Years, who provide our opening and closing tracks. They kick us off with Last Stand, take us home with Summer of 99. Be sure to head over to thefestiveyears.com for any and all Festive Years needs.
Our friend and fellow podcaster, Hans Rothwieser, he's the man behind our logo, behind all the graphics on our webpage, our Patreon page, our merch page. That little tomato looking at itself in the mirror, that's Hans's handiwork. If you like it and you want to tell him how much you like it, just shoot him an email at mildemonios@hotmail.com. That's mildemonios.com. Or you can reach him on Twitter at mildemonios. Or you can check out his website, mildemonios.pe, where he has all his other work listed. He's a writer. He has a bunch of zombie novels available there. And he's also a podcaster. Like I said, he has a podcast about Peruvian current affairs called Nación Combi and a podcast about economy called Marginal. Hans, thank you for all your support.
And we continue to thank the support of our friends over at the Late Night Grin. LateNightGrin.com, at Late Night Grin on Twitter. You can also find them on YouTube, Late Night Grin. Wrestling podcast, occasionally cover film as well. They have their watch-alongs they refer to as grin-alongs. And there's a monthly show on there called The Grin Grappler that they are so gracious to include me on monthly, as I guess I'm a regular part of the panel now. Legitimate friends I've made through the internet over there. And so, boys, continue to keep up the good work. They continue to support us, so we want to continue to support them as well. And speaking of support, no better example than that of Ms. Zoe Perez, our social media guru, our social media czar, continues to give us great effort and churn out great work, not just for us, but for you, our fans, dare I say, and adoring public. You can find us facebook.com/Contrarian Prime, Instagram @Contrarian Prime, youtube.com @Contrarian Prime. We're taking over, man. And, you know, you patrons kind of already know this and have an insight to it, but we continue to expand where we can, and a huge part of that is Zoe. So Zoe, as always, we really appreciate the work that you do for us. And we appreciate y'all, our listening public, and the people who continue to tune in for listening. We do the show for you, so we appreciate you listening. But that is going to do it for this episode of The Contrarians, where we're right and you're wrong, and we will catch you next time.
I just can't quite get by. That time in 1999, that summer of